All right, guys, welcome back to another Atlas Hour. Today, we figured that we will go through our lab panel. This is our lab panel, right, Josh? You did ours?
This is yes. Well,
Yeah,
it's our
the
comprehensive,
comprehensive.
but yes.
Yeah, so this is the panel that we tell you guys to get that you can get with code Atlas at Marek. If you look in the description, you'll see the link that you can type out, or you can order your own labs with code Atlas too. But this is the panel that we would suggest just because it's the most comprehensive. It also allows you to get any treatments. We have certain what would you say? Like you have to hit a certain amount of labs in order to get treatment. You know, there's mandatory
hmm
labs that we get. So this one makes sure that you hit them all. Mandatory because the providers want to see certain things. Like you can't just get testosterone and then hope to get testosterone. You know, they want to make sure that your lipids are good and see where your estradiol is, your SHBG, things like that. So when I say there's like mandatory labs, it's just because the providers have decided that those are the ones that they want to see before giving treatment. So Josh just got labs. How long ago? 2 weeks ago?
Yep, 2 weeks.
Yeah, little while ago, Josh got labs. We figured that we'll go through the panel and kind of show you guys everything that you would get. This will be similar to a lab review that maybe you would get with your health coach at Marek Health. And yeah, we'll walk through it, see how Josh is doing, see if he's on a ton of gear and everything, and how unhealthy he is. And so I will. Josh, are you okay with us sharing your profile out here in the interwebs?
Absolutely.
It has his social security, his
Bank
address.
routing number, everything you need.
Yeah, but no, it would be protected health information, so we got your consent to do so. It does have your Marek Health ID, but I don't think that's going anywhere. So cool. All right, let me share this screen. Then I'm going to be looking off to the side. So sorry, guys, you don't see my ugly face. All right, can you all see that? You good on that side, Josh?
Yep, I can see it on my
If
side.
you can see it, they can see it. Cool. So we have 27-year-old Josh. I'm burping. Where's me? So yeah, we start out here with your thyroid panel. So this is the TSH and the free T4. The thing that I hate every single day, I have to scroll all the way to the bottom to see the T3, and I care the most about the T3.
Isn't it so weird how they don't group it together? Yeah, I don't understand it. It's bizarre.
I know. I'm always like there, and then I got to scroll all the way to the bottom because I know where everything is on LabCorp now, which is great. It throws a wrench in my system when somebody has like a Quest lab or something. I'm just like, where's everything? Because I'm so used to LabCorp now. But yeah, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. So that's the signaling hormone that your brain, your hypothalamus, pituitary specifically, sends this TSH down to stimulate the thyroid to produce more thyroid hormone. So we talked about this a good amount in the podcast with Conrad because he's big on thyroid health. But TSH is kind of one marker that you can really look at, because if this is elevated, then you know that your brain sensing it needs more thyroid. It's telling your thyroid to produce more. So I personally like to aim for a number below 2.5. I think Marek as a whole kind of has even more aggressive ranges, and some of our providers like to go like below a 1.5. So I think Josh is perfect here, and he's been very consistent because you can see that TSH was the same back in, when did you get these?
It was 2 weeks prior. Yeah, so I had two sets of labs back to back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because remember, I kind of wanted, this is a kind of cool insight, because this is like a standard panel was the one 2 weeks before that you would get at your doc's office, and then what we do here at Marek. So it was kind of interesting to see some of the difference with like sensitive and non-sensitive testing.
Yeah, you got previous labs with us back in January too, I saw. So yeah, but yeah, that's cool. You stayed very standard there, which is interesting. T4 went up a little bit. So the T4 is what the thyroid actually makes and kind of pumps out, and then it gets converted into T3, which is the active form, the form that's actually kind of doing the bulk of the work. And that's what we were joking about, is that you have to scroll all the way down to see that, which is down here, T3. So I like a level above 3.0. Josh is 3.6, so that's great. I think Conrad did a really good job of kind of telling us that he doesn't even focus on these levels. He goes solely based on how he feels. And I think that's something really important when messing with hormones. And I tell patients all the time that this is lab work and I don't want to just treat the paper. We need to treat the individual. So, like with testosterone, for example, if a guy has a 200 testosterone, which by most everyone would say that's very low, but they were like, dude, I've got a rampant libido. I'm crushing it at the gym. I'm making good gains. I'm motivated. I'm killing it in my business, which I've had a few guys like this. I'm like, let's not even talk about testosterone then. You're hitting all those metrics. Could you be better? Maybe, but maybe your body just only needs that much. And maybe we screw things up by messing with it. And conversely, if a guy has what most people would consider to be very good hormone levels, but they're feeling all the symptoms, maybe they do need treatment. So it goes both ways. I mean, you need to take in a bit, the labs kind of guide us and they give us, insight into generally where you are. But you also just really need to treat the patients. That's huge. So things to look for with thyroid, classic symptoms are poor energy, just like basic fatigue, like Conrad talked about. He could sleep 12 hours and never felt rested. Cold extremities, that's a big one. That one's hard to tease out in women specifically. Mm-hmm. All those guys out there know that your girl probably always has cold hands and feet. It's just the way it is there. Evolutionarily, they divert more blood to their core because they need to carry a baby. And so we have warmer extremities than they do. So it's always hard because a female will always be like, oh, my hands and feet are always cold. It's not really the greatest in you. If they start becoming way more cold than ever, we correlate that with lower levels. And yeah, guys, it's a big one. But also hair, skin, nail quality, mood. Some people feel depressed when their levels are down lower. The gut thyroid connection is more and more literature coming out on that. Some people will feel constipated and they don't have regular bowel movements, are bloated. Fixed thyroid, all that improves. So there's a lot of, thyroid's kind of all encompassing. But anyways, Josh's thyroid looks amazing. So go back up here. This is our CBC. So this is going to just look at all of the blood, basically. So we got his red blood cells, his white blood cells, his hematocrit, his hemoglobin. These are important to look at for a few reasons, like infection is a big one. So if you see like really high elevated white blood cell count, and his neutrophils and lymphocytes, basophils, eosinophils are all elevating things, we can know that he has an infection, and based on what type of white blood cell, maybe what kind of infection. When we're talking about hormones, usually the things that we're looking at are the red blood cell count, hematocrit, and hemoglobin. Yours have actually stayed super perfect, which is interesting. And I've been talking about this like on my Instagram and things, and talking about it with patients, is that I think when we see these crazy elevations in, say, like red blood cell count, hematocrit, hemoglobin on testosterone, it's a really good indicator that we may be overdosing, in my opinion, because if we're just talking about replacement therapy, testosterone replacement therapy, in my opinion, there literally should be no side effects, because if it's just replacement, it should be replacing to where your body can, take it. Your body should be naturally, say, producing 700 testosterone. And so if we give it 700 testosterone, you would think, even from a layman's perspective, that there should be no side effects, because we're just taking a hormone that should be there and replacing it. I think when we run into issues is when the levels are too high for the person's health at that time. And what I mean by that is I think that certain health, certain levels of health can take more testosterone, and when you're unhealthy, you may not need as much. Dave Lee talked to us about he likens it to like a car and fuel. You can't have you can't put like Lamborghini fuel, like that premium fuel, in your old beat down Honda Civic. It's just not going to work. You need to build the car to be able to accept that fuel. So yeah, your hematocrit and hemoglobin and your red blood cell count have all stayed very, very normal. And do you do any blood donations or anything?
No, and I was just going to add to your point. Years ago, obviously, when I was running higher doses of stuff and competing, I definitely had to on a frequent basis because those were elevated. But over the last 3 years, since I've come down to 3-4 years to like you're saying, a high normal level, I've never even had them get close to the top end of the reference range. So I think you bring up a great point that it can be an indicator of like, hey, maybe it's just too much for you to handle, actually.
Yeah. I've been really thinking about that. because we know that it increases erythropoiesis, the creation of these red blood cells. But again, if we're just doing normal dosing, it should just be normal. You should stay within those normal ranges. So there's a lot of debate in the community, though, in TRT as to whether or not elevations in red blood cell count, hematocrit, hemoglobin are actually deleterious to one's health if it's TRT in a healthy young individual. I don't know. I definitely see their point, because they'll bring up the fact that people who are healthy, who live at high elevations, don't just start getting clots, and they don't need routine phlebotomies like we suggest for TRT. I don't like to take the chance. So if somebody is coming in with a 55 hematocrit, which, as you guys can see, that's pretty high above the upper normal limit, why take the chance just to give a blood donation? Usually people have got pretty elevated iron with that as well, and so you generally feel a little bit better. It's weird in this community. We have dogma on either side. We have the dogma of the normal endocrinology societies, who were like, one injection of testosterone a week with anastrozole, and that's it, and blood donations like every month. And then we've got the other side, which is like no blood donations ever. I don't care if they're hematocrit 70. It's like crazy. Why is everybody so black and white and dogmatic? They get that way about AIs too. Like I heard from somebody that there was a TRT coach out there that was like talking bad about Marek, saying that we give AIs. And I was like, well, first of all, nobody ever just gives AIs prophylactically. But second, why would you just never give them? It's like, yeah, we never just throw them in willy-nilly, but if somebody truly needs one occasionally here and there, and I'm talking maybe probably less than 1% of people, probably like 0.005% of people may need one who come through, but why would you just say never? It's just kind of weird. Yeah, there's so much dogma everywhere.
There is. And especially on, I don't know, like the hematocrit side of things, just so I grew up with dad who was a cyclist, so I'm like super familiar with the old Tour de France days, and like they had guys die back in the days when they were overdosing with what's it called? Erythropoietin. Yeah, EPO. And their crit would get up like high 50s, 60s, and like there were guys that stroked out and died. So not saying that's going to happen to everyone on TRT, obviously, but there certainly is a point to be made that like it is a little dangerous. I feel like, in my opinion, once it starts creeping up there.
I just don't see I see the downside in over donating, because people can iron deficient, and that happens a lot. People come in with an iron deficiency anemia and they feel like crap because they've been over donating. But to just flat out say no one ever needs to donate, I think that's kind of silly. But anyways, all your lab work looks great. Let's see. Previously, you had a little bit of elevation in your MCHV. So usually when any of these are higher, it can be like a macrocytic anemia. So there may be a B vitamin deficiency. If they're lower, it could be a microcytic anemia, which is iron deficiency. I don't think this is a true anemia in any way. It was just 0.1 above the upper end of normal, but no, that looks very normal. It doesn't look like you were infected or anything, no infections going on. This kind of tells us a little bit more about your metabolic health, kind of, not really in an athlete. I think the CMP is a much better indicator for your gen pop.
Great.
For, if you have a sedentary individual, and so if I saw a sedentary individual with these ranges, I might be a little concerned, because your BUN's a bit high. With an athlete, they're probably just eating higher amounts of protein. Also may just be dehydrated, because you're getting these done first thing in the morning. And I know I don't drink. I don't know. Maybe you did, but you may be a little bit dehydrated from just fasting for the past 12 hours or so. Same with like the AG ratio. It's usually the case. The bilirubin's interesting, though. I was seeing this. This was twice. I don't know if your January ones had elevated bilirubin. Do you remember if they did?
It was just, I think it was like 1 point, or no, maybe it was 0.9. So it was not elevated then. And I was kind of curious on the bilirubin too. I don't know if that translates the same as like AST and ALT, which can be elevated just from training really hard. I kind of wanted to get your insight on because I don't really actually know the difference between, or like what bilirubin's like really a best marker or indicator for.
Yeah, it's more like a biliary thing, so it's related to your gallbladder as well. But there's also something called Gilbert's syndrome, where you produce more bilirubin than others. which I was wondering if you had, like, if the January one had this too, then you might be looking in like Gilbert's, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to have. There's some research showing that people with Gilbert's have protection against cardiovascular events. Kind of interesting. But yeah, I would suspect that maybe it has to do with just all the running and everything that you do.
It actually
To
always was
differentiate.
elevated when I was a kid too. I should note that. Even when I was like 16, 17 and getting lab work, it was something my primary care noted back then that my bilirubin would be elevated.
Oh, interesting. Maybe you do have that Gilbert's.
Yeah. That's
I
what
don't
he
know if
always thought
there's
back then. I remember him bringing it up and being like, "Oh yeah, I forgot the name of the disease, but yeah, that was it."
Oh, okay. There we go. Sounds like
Yeah.
Josh's Gilbert's. Interesting. Yeah. So there's some literature on that talks about the cardioprotective effects, which is interesting. And I think there's what it is, like a deletion, either a deletion or an expression, some genetic change, in some gene. I can't remember the one, but it's a genetic thing. Interesting though. On the AST ALT, like you were talking about, we can kind of assume that maybe yours was exercise induced, and how I determine that really is like AST in isolation elevated, like Josh's is here, is probably more likely due to muscular stress. And Josh is running a lot of miles and working out a lot throughout the week, so makes sense. But AST is found in not only liver, but muscle tissue, cardiac tissue. And so when he's working his muscles hard, we could expect to see, a little bit of an elevation in this AST. See, the ALT is way more liver specific. And just the way I remembered this, like in school, was ALT has a L in there. And so I think liver. So the ALT is more liver specific. His have stayed nice and low. So I don't think his liver is stressed at all. I think this is coming mainly from muscle stress.
Gotcha. Good to know.
Urinalysis is good to look at, especially in like a bodybuilder or something where we're concerned about kidney function. Oh, actually, let's go back up here. Kidney function. So we would look at creatinine and GFR, which in 80 GFR for a young 27-year-old isn't the greatest. But that's because his creatinine is, kind of elevated because he is a muscular guy who breaks down a lot of muscle. So when you work out your muscles, you use creatine. When creatine, gets transferred from or donates phosphates to your whole, exercise energy inducing, whatever you call it, pathways, creatine gets broken down and it gets converted into creatinine. Also supplementing with creatine, you will break that down and you can convert it to creatinine. Protein, same thing. So high protein diets, muscular body, works out, takes creatine, we always expect to see an elevation in creatinine. The thing with that is that that's coming from having more creatinine in like taking in more and having more, in circulation, not an issue with getting rid of it. So in your normal individual, like I said, gen pop or sedentary individual, if they have elevated creatinine and they're not doing all of those things, the issue is probably coming from slower clearance rate. So his kidneys aren't getting rid of enough of it. Josh, that's not the issue. His is more before, your kidneys are probably clearing just fine. You just have more of the actual solute in the solution. So we are not concerned with that in Josh, but we order other things like a cystatin C or an SDMA, which are much more in depth and they're not influenced by supplementing with creatine per se. So just something to consider if you see your creatinine is elevated and your EGFR is lower than you would like, but you are falling into that category, which I would suspect most of our listeners are, where they're supplementing with creatine or protein or working out. Don't worry, just order cystatin C.
Good to know. Yeah, because I was kind of curious on that too. I was like, I feel like that's a little on the lower side, but that makes sense that it's just basically having, I guess, work a little harder to clear all the creatinine that's floating around.
Yeah, well, they do a calculation, and so since your actual creatine is higher, the calculation comes out with this being a little bit lower. So,
okay.
They didn't actually do like a filtration test where you could do like a urine collection and actually see, the filtration. So this is just coming off of a calculation. The calculation skewed due to how much creatine then creatinine is in the system.
Okay, that makes much more sense then.
Urinalysis is, like I said, is interesting to look at if you're like, say, looking at a bodybuilder or something, you're concerned about kidney function. And the main thing is probably like the protein. We shouldn't have protein in our urine. And if you're getting protein in your urine, that's a sign of kidney disease. and pretty progressed kidney disease, so it can be worrying. Same with, you really shouldn't be having glucose in your urine. Oftentimes we will see ketones in a lot of guys' urine, though, especially if they're on a carnivore or a keto diet. Of course, even just fasting can throw some guys into a ketosis. So it's not uncommon to see some ketones in there. Actually surprised that you didn't, but you probably eat pretty good amount of carbs at night, huh? Yeah. I know you fast in the early part of the day, so there might be a point in the day where you switch a little bit into ketosis, but no, everything looks normal in your analysis. Lipids is a fun one Josh has been toying with, so we were interested to see. I personally don't really care about total cholesterol, but his is low, and we'll see why. So he's got great triglycerides. They've even improved. They improved in a week this time. Triglycerides are a little finicky, though. They can be, unlike other lipid parameters like triglycerides, if he were to eat a meal, his triglycerides would probably be sky high. So if he ate, on this night, if he ate a kind of a heavier, fattier meal and he still had some residual triglycerides in the blood, it would be a little bit higher. But this is still a really good number. This 94.
And that prior test was it. That one that it's showing to the right was at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So that's why it was. I had food obviously throughout the day before this panel that we're looking at was fasted very first thing in the morning.
Gotcha. Yeah, but that's still great having a 94. So a 36. But when I think about triglycerides, it's more a function of your metabolic health, not so much just cardiovascular. It can negatively impact your cardiovascular health for sure, without a doubt. But when triglycerides are elevated, that's mainly due to poor metabolic health, insulin resistance, etc. So you look great, super metabolically healthy. HDL cholesterol. Interesting. You have really good HDL cholesterol. Historically, everybody has considered HDL cholesterol the good cholesterol, healthy. That thought has kind of changed. We know that people with higher levels of HDL tend to have less cardiovascular events, so less stroke, heart attack. The reason I say the thought has kind of changed around it, though, is we've made drugs that have really boosted HDL and it didn't change the outcomes. People still died of the same amount of heart attacks, strokes. And so they've kind of, at this point, we're kind of like, we don't know what's going on with HDL and what's up with that. But it's probably good to have a higher level. And this is another one that can be hard to keep up elevated when you're on TRT, which Josh is. So the fact that he's having a 60, that's really awesome.
And I know that it's kind of, we've changed our thought on it, as far as how, I guess, important it is just to have a high number. But as far as my understanding is, it's more of the functionality of your HDLs, right? The where it can go into the cholesterol efflux, where it essentially takes from the LDL and I guess then reverts into a high density lipoprotein. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's the reverse transport system. So the HDLs will be taking the lipids from the LDL, which are the ApoB containing particles, and HDLs are the ApoA1 containing particles. So they'll be taking the lipids and kind of bringing them back to the liver to be broken down and used up. So their role is what we think probably that they're, scooping up excess lipids within the blood throughout the body and bringing them back to the liver. And so, I don't think, to my knowledge, there's no way to test the efficiency of HDL. Yeah, the functionality. We want ones that are highly efficient at scooping up those lipids from the LDL and bringing them back, but there's no true way to measure that. So one would kind of think that the more you have, probably the better they can do their job. But I think, Tom Dayspring once threw a wrench in there, and he was like, well, if you think about just the reverse transport system, if you're thinking that HDLs are bringing them back to the liver to be destroyed, then one would maybe want lower levels, because you would want to, you would say that they're so successful at bringing them back and then being destroyed. They're working really well. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, I like that. I'm going to go with that because I always have low HDL.
Hey, but it's true though. I mean, yeah, you could have a 40, but they might be much more functional than my 60 are. So it evens out.
Yeah, you just can't really know, unfortunately. But regardless, looking at the ratio of the two too is a good marker of metabolic health. So you're doing really good there. And then the difference between HDL and LDL, for those listening, you have high density lipoprotein and then low density lipoprotein. That just, if you think back to chemistry, density is how kind of heavy, essentially, something is. So the high density, they have more protein, less fat associated with them, because fat is, not as heavy as protein. Where the LDL is low density, so they're not as dense. They're more fluffy. They're more fatty. So that's why they're more atherogenic. The funny thing is that the cholesterol contained within LDL is the exact same cholesterol contained within HDL. There's no difference. So when people say healthy cholesterol versus like bad cholesterol, that's like a misnomer. It's incorrect, because it's the same cholesterol. It's packaging that really makes a difference. So these have more like protein associated with them. These are more fatty. The difference becomes in that protein, that carrier protein, like the lipoprotein capital A1 is the HDL ones, and those ones are the protective ones, the good ones. And then you have the LDL ones, which are the ApoB containing. And so the ApoB is really what we want to get down. And ApoB wraps around VLDL, IDL, LDL, and that just stands for very low density. So that means like these very low ones, there's a ton of cholesterol in there. They're very low weight. They don't have much of that, protein and other things. And we have LDL, and then this is just a ratio. I don't care about that. But anyways, your LDL cholesterol is super low. We're at 28. So there's people like some carnivores would say that's terrible and Josh is going to die and cholesterol is super necessary. Though we've seen, in a lot of literature that you can basically crush cholesterol to extremely low levels and not have any negative outcomes. So people get confused cholesterol, and yes, cholesterol is very important and you need it for basically every cell in your body contains cholesterol. You need it for hormone synthesis. You need it for neuron synthesis, for cognitive function. But like I said, every cell contains it. Every cell can kind of make it on their own too. So our brain cells, they're not getting cholesterol from our blood cholesterol that we're measuring here. They're making their own when they need it. And so we're not stopping that from occurring, if we have this low amount. So you don't really need to worry too much if this gets too low that all of a sudden all these functions are going to get messed up. This is just the smallest fraction of what Josh has in his full body. Like we said, every single cell is made of this stuff and can donate it if needed. So this is, it's just doesn't make much difference. It's irrelevant to your overall total pool of cholesterol. But anyways, what did you do to get this number so low? Because, a number, as you can see, the upper normal limit is 99. We usually want this for people high risk to have them below 70. So say like a diabetic individual or somebody with a history of heart disease, you want this below 70. So Josh is at 28. What are you doing to get that?
So I've just been doing 10 milligrams of ezetimibe daily, and then rosuvastatin 5 milligrams twice a week. So I do it on Mondays and Fridays typically. So very, very low dose of rosuvastatin on top of it.
So you're on rosuvastatin, and rosuvastatin has that word statin in it, which everyone is extremely afraid of. Are you just having like debilitating cramps to where you can't perform whatsoever and zero cognitive function? Because that's what I hear happens.
Yeah, no, not whatsoever. And, I will say that I do supplement with some ubiquinol, 200 milligrams a day, just as, I guess, a prophylactic measure if there were to be any, extreme muscular soreness. But I certainly have had no issues. And, I think for the vast majority of people now, I guess, new wave of statins are much more benign. And it's, I think much more rare to see that nowadays. And I'm sure you would know that better than I do.
Yeah, and my own personal experiences. I don't take a statin anymore, so I don't think I need to crush it to these levels. And I don't know if you'll continue to or not, but I got my levels down low like this, just kind of to experiment. And I didn't see it. I didn't feel a thing. I mean, you're much more of a high performer than I am, so I'm more interested to hear how you're doing, because you really rely a lot on your fitness and you use it every single day, basically with runs and everything. So to hear that you're not getting cramps is awesome. I was pretty sedentary and not getting cramps, but regardless, I used it and didn't feel a thing. And I actually used 10 milligrams of rosuvastatin daily. And so I really got mine low. Yeah. So, in classic medicine, they can go up to like 40 milligrams daily. I used 10 for 2 days and then 3 days, and I ramped it all the way up until I got to daily just to see what would happen. That was on top of ezetimibe too. And I didn't feel anything. There was no brain fog, no nothing. You're right. The newer ones like rosuvastatin, we don't really see that much with it. But if you are somebody who's sensitive to a statin, which is around 5% of the population, which is crazy because the way that people talk about it sounds like around 95% of the population will get side effects. It's like they're the one drugs that have been so demonized. It's insane. I don't get it. I mean, even prior to me going through, all my medical training and everything, I even had like just a negative connotation with statin because,
Me too.
yeah, I think it just is in the median thing. Statin's bad, and I don't understand it. It's kind of weird. I don't know who propagated that. But then when I actually started looking into it, I'm like, these seem really cool and effective. And actually only 5% of people get side effects. That's weird. There's a lot of medications like the GLP-1 agonists where like 100% of people get side effects and everybody's loves them. It's just interesting. And when I say 100% of people get side effects, I mean, a little bit of nausea, you can say it's a side effect and you demonstrate that as a side effect, but.
Yeah. And I just think the like cardiovascular preventative drugs we have now are like the coolest in my opinion, as far as like preventing any chronic illness, just because they are so advanced now and most of them are so benign. And like, I mean, theoretically, if you started, taking them young in a prophylactic measure, like you could almost blunt like any coronary artery disease down the road just by keeping your levels so low. So I think it is pretty cool, like as far as the advancement there.
Yeah, exactly. And the other medication that you were taking, so, like I was kind of trying to allude to, I think, was that if you're somebody who is sensitive to statins, those other medications. So Josh is taking ezetimibe. I take ezetimibe daily. Ezetimibe works completely different from a statin. So a statin works on cholesterol synthesis. So I think even if you've never taken biochemistry, you've probably seen a biochemical mechanism where you start with one product and then you have this huge tree of all these other products to get to something. So you have, this up here and it converts down to cholesterol. Well, there's all these enzymes and things in there, and there's usually a rate limiting step where it's like if this one step doesn't occur, then you can't get everything else. So there's something called HMG-CoA reductase, which is an enzyme, and these statins work on that enzyme to kind of shut it down so that it can't further down the tree turn into cholesterol. So it blocks the synthesis of that. Ezetimibe works in our gut to block these receptors called Niemann-Pick C-like-1 receptors. So that's a receptor in the gut that basically absorbs cholesterol and shuttles it back to the liver. And so when I usually tell people that this works in the gut to block cholesterol absorption, everybody usually the first thought is, well, I thought cholesterol, like the cholesterol you eat, doesn't exacerbate or elevate my levels of cholesterol, which is true. But the way that this works is your liver produces cholesterol, shuttles it into your gut where it mixes with bile. And then that goes, through digestion again into the intestine, and then it gets reabsorbed through that intestine. So this is the cholesterol you've made in your liver, shuttled into the gut, mixes with bile, gets reabsorbed. Normally would go to the liver, and the liver needs it for its normal day-to-day function. So when you block those receptors from reabsorbing the cholesterol that we've made, the liver basically senses, whoa, I'm getting less cholesterol than I normally do. And it increases the receptors that are on its surface, the LDL receptors. So it puts more out there that can cling to more of the blood cholesterol and start using that up. So it's kind of an elegant way that you don't shut down the synthesis and you just start using more of what you already have, which leads to almost no side effects, which is really cool too. I can never tell if I'm on it or not. I don't know if you've had similar experience.
Oh, I mean, I think like really the only side effect that we ever get reported if patients are using it is like some GI stress, but that's super rare. And obviously I think it's even hard for us to, know if that's exactly what's even causing their GI stress sometimes, because it is so benign for most people.
Yeah, exactly. I've heard some crazy stuff from people. I think they just know it's a cholesterol medication, and
yes,
they'll
and
be
their
like,
heads, yes.
yeah, they're like, my toe started hurting, and the only thing I did was add ezetimibe. I'm like, okay, I don't think it was that, but you never want to discount somebody's experience completely. But I'm like, I'm pretty sure that wasn't that. But that being said, it's when you look at the data, the side effects are so low. It can usually by itself lower the ApoB containing particles by around 18%. So that's pretty significant. And it can give HDL a little bit of a boost too. So if you don't want a statin, that's a great thing to just have in. I have it in baseline. I don't even have elevated lipids. Josh doesn't either, but we both use it kind of preventatively. As Josh said, you can kind of just eradicate, your risk of cardiovascular disease. As like Peter Attia says, like cardiovascular disease is the first leading killer. And it should literally probably be like the 10th or the 15th, because we have all of these medications that we could, legitimately prevent it, which is crazy to think so many people don't want to. Like if we told you that we have medications where we know that you just won't get cancer if you can take them, like I think most people would be like, that's awesome.
Absolutely.
Jump on those. And that's what we kind of have with these cholesterol medications. We can say, we're pretty sure that if you take these, you just never will have a heart attack or a stroke. You'll still probably die of cancer or old age or, all of these other things, but at least you knock out one of the killers, a leading killer. And so many people are resistant. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. I feel like just because obviously we know the way that cardiovascular disease works, in the sense that it's such a slow buildup throughout your life, that I think that's like the almost immediacy of it is what throws people off. Whereas like cancer, we think of like, oh my God, when I realize I've got cancer, normally it's a pretty quick downhill type of thing. So it's like, I don't know if maybe that has something to do with it, that it's like, because it's such a slow rolling type of disease, it doesn't add any urgency to like, oh, well, it's something I need to prevent now.
Yeah, definitely. I think that definitely plays a role. And yeah, I think we probably harped on the cholesterol, so I could go on that.
Sorry,
all day.
I know.
But no. I was going to go down a whole other tangent. I'm like, I'll just wait for another time. I have so many tangents when it comes to lipids. But some would argue Josh's levels are too low. I don't think so. He's performing extremely well. He's cognitively there, as you can hear. He doesn't sound too stupid, at least. So I think we're pretty good.
It is early, but.
Next thing down the line would be iron. And then this one's interesting to look at, especially if you're donating, etc. Like we definitely want to look at the iron, and it also comes in handy when we're looking at, say, ferritin. Another one stupid, like ferritin is not included in this iron. I hate when they're not next to each other.
It's just on its own line.
Ferritin's a protein that will carry iron, and so when you see like ferritin elevated, I always want to go check the iron too. Is the iron elevated too? And is the ferritin elevated because the iron's elevated? And then that makes sense. Or is ferritin elevated in isolation, which is an inflammatory marker? And so we know, iron's normal, ferritin's high. Maybe this is more inflammation going on. All that being said, Josh's iron looks totally normal. Nothing, pretty unremarkable here. I think it all looks good. DHT, this was one that he was really interested in looking at because you are taking a DHT lowering medication to some extent, right?
A topical dutasteride. And I kind of wanted to see, the theory is that dutasteride, due to its molecular weight being lower, that it does not absorb. It's systemic as like something with finasteride or something like a topical finasteride. So as you can see, and I'm sure I'll let you dive into it. It looks like there certainly is some systemic absorption.
But you were previously taking oral finasteride, right?
Yes, but not for a long time. I had been off that for 6 months before I started the topical dutasteride.
Oh, were you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I it was a good clearance time, obviously. So I imagine my DHT normal or levels had kind of returned to baseline by that point.
Yeah, I was just looking up the half-life, which is 8 days. So yeah, it's definitely cleared if you were taking oral finasteride. So that's interesting, but it's not terrible. Let's see, your testosterone levels where are they? Right here. So yeah, I mean, maybe we'd expect it to be a little bit higher, but it's not terrible. You still at least have some circulating DHT. It's not crushing it, which we would. I would. Do you remember what your DHT levels were when you were on finasteride?
I actually never had them tested, but Brandon and I kind of compared notes here, and he had blood work from similar testosterone levels and taking 1 milligram of finasteride daily, and his DHT levels were roughly around here. So kind of, it seems like it's maybe systemically giving you the same suppression, but theoretically you're getting much more at the scalp. So I was actually kind of happy to see this, like, okay, it's not crushing it entirely. And, it seems like maybe a viable option if you want to use something that's stronger than finasteride, but maybe not going to, crush it is down to zero in your system.
I think there's way too many variables, and obviously you can't just take an N of one, Josh, and say that everybody is going to get the systemic absorption. I think the integrity of the scalp is a big one. Do you
Of
have
course.
any openings in your scalp? Any scratches,
Hmm.
dandruff, seborrheic dermatitis, acne, anything that would be allowing this to make its way in. So that's a huge thing.
Yep.
So there's so many variables and everybody's different. I'm sure we have different absorption rates, but yeah, this isn't terrible. I would personally like mine higher
Hmm.
just because I like DHT. I think it's, a potent androgen. DHT is an annoying hormone because everywhere else in the body, DHT is what's causing hair to grow. And then at the scalp, it just causes it to all fall out. So stupid. Like, I wish it was reversed. Like,
Yeah.
most of us would be fine having pretty hairless bodies and a full head of hair.
100%. I'd have to do a lot less shaving because of it. So,
Right. And unless like our eyebrows fell out or something, that would be awful.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's just weird. But anyways, DHT, a lot of people will come in with symptoms of low testosterone and have decent testosterone. You do a little bit of digging. They've been taking finasteride. I really truly believe that, DHT is like the strongest androgen. I think it has a lot of role, and a lot of what we feel from testosterone is coming via DHT actually. So strength, aggression, libido, erection quality. Had had somebody in our comments when we talked about this about finasteride, like just laid out a crazy paragraph about how DHT doesn't cause any of those things, and I was so stupid and everything. And I think they based that off. I think there was like one paper that basically talked about that. But that basically, that crushes the hypothesis of post-finasteride syndrome causing all these issues. And I don't know. There's millions of people who have experienced negative side effects from
Yeah.
finasteride. Just because
Yeah.
we don't classify it as a diagnosable condition, I don't want to say that those people are crazy. And it makes sense to me that if you just take the strongest androgen and suppress the hell out of it, that you're going to feel something. It seems kind of crazy to think that you wouldn't feel anything.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Some
Agree.
people do really well. I think Derek takes oral dutasteride, if I remember. Doesn't
He
he talk
does.
about that pretty
Yeah.
publicly? Yeah.
Half a milligram daily.
I think placebo would get me probably more than anything else, just because I have this stance on DHT. I've certainly seen guys like yourself who took it and didn't have any negative experiences. I see a lot of patients say you don't have any. You kind of got to figure out yourself. There are ways like this. Our panel won't tell you. Yeah, actually, our panel may tell you. So, getting this first, like our panel, if you're interested in hair loss, would actually be pretty good because we want to see
I
where
did
you're at.
add on the DHT on this one.
Oh,
So
fuck.
this is,
Never mind.
yeah, no. So yeah,
But
this is
still,
not come
Code
with a
Atlas will send you
comprehensive.
10%.
Yes, so you would get it off of your add-on.
Okay. So yeah, you can get like a hair panel and then throw Code Atlas on there if you're interested in doing finasteride or dutasteride. You want to see if you're a good candidate. You want to look at DHT first because if Josh was coming saying I'm not taking any 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, I'm interested in hair loss meds, I would be like, ooh, yours is already pretty low. I think if we give you anything right now, we're probably going to crush you down into that lower range. So that's one area to look at. The other would be pregnenolone, which I don't know if you have pregnenolone on here. You do
Do
have
not have
progesterone
pregnenolone.
though.
Yep. Which is kind of, I guess you can kind of use that as a good biomarker for that, can't you?
Yeah, so you can look at progesterone, which is a little bit downstream from pregnenolone, and you can kind of see, and the why we want to look at this too is that 5-alpha reductase, which is what finasteride dutasteride is working on, takes this and converts it into something called allopregnenolone, which is a neurosteroid that impacts our mood and our cognition. And so when people feel the post-finasteride syndrome where they have a depressed mood and they have brain fog, it may be due to disrupting these neurosteroid cascades as well. So if Josh had, say, 0.1 or lower, like a 0.0 of progesterone too, I'd say maybe want to hold off on that. You don't have even a lot of pool to be blocking, so there's things that you can look at. But yeah, enough on the DHT. It's interesting to see, you maybe are getting some absorption. Is it due to your scalp integrity? Who knows, but it's not terrible at least, and you're feeling good. So that's important. Then the testosterone, the one that everybody's going to be super concerned with. Previously, so a week before, or no, this was done in January. So your previous one didn't have testosterone, it looks like.
And when I was not taking a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, which with it being at 886, that's kind of my theory that it's elevated a little because I'm blocking some of that conversion to DHT. So my total is going to be higher.
Definitely could be. Yeah. So he previously was 700, now 886, both great. Again, we got to treat, how the person feels and not just go off the number. But do you feel the same between these two, or do you feel any difference?
No difference. Yeah.
See, that's another thing that I try to drive home to people too is, this difference, this, like 200-point difference, you can't feel it really. He even has he doubled his free testosterone, and everybody will say that the free testosterone is so important, but he's literally not feeling any difference between these two. It's pretty negligible. So if you were to take this number and turn that into a 3,600, he's going to feel probably something different. But taking just doing a 200-point increase where there's some guys who have a 500 and want to go on TRT to get it into, an optimal 700 or 800. I'm like, dude, you might not really feel it, That being said, though, again, you got to go off the person's symptoms. The hard part with testosterone is that the symptoms are just so general that, it's hard to kind of tease that out. I've got low libido. Well, do you have low libido because you're thinking that your libido should be that it was when you were 17? Or do you really have low libido? Is it just because you're an adult? I had this conversation with a guy yesterday because he was like, at the end of the day, my wife, may want some and I'm just exhausted. And, 10 years ago, I would have been all over that. And I'm like, me too, and I got, really good testosterone levels, but I'm a grown ass man now. I'm mature and I have, other interests in life. So it's, you got to kind of put that into consideration. So I'll tell guys, all right, let's just take a hypothetical. So you're on vacation, the kids are taken care of, business is great, you're not stressing about money, you have no stressors. You're on vacation, wife's in lingerie, and she's on the bed telling you to get over there, and you're like, nah, I don't really want to. Okay, there's something wrong. Yep. But if it's just because at the end of a super hard day where you just bust your ass for 12 hours and then played with the kids and then helped the wife clean up the dishes and everything, and you're in bed and now you're tanked, probably not low testosterone causing that, It's just because you're a normal man who worked a hard ass day,
Yep. No, and it's funny you actually say that because I, for some reason, was thinking about that the other day that, like, not to get too personal, but on the weekends when things are a little more chill, I'm not having as long days, like I'm always much more in the mood. And during like yesterday, man. Yeah. But like, yesterday was 4:45. I'm up straight to running, working all day. I worked until 6 o'clock and, got to bed last night at 9 p.m. And I'm like, it's the last thing I want. I'm like, I got to get to bed because I'm waking up at 4:45 the next morning. Like it's just, it's a difference there. It's not that, of course, like you said, not that you don't want it. It's just, I'm prioritizing different things during the week. And then on the weekends, it's like, now I can have my fun time.
Exactly. Weekends are our time, man. That's like the only time things go down. Other than that, I'm like, can this be done? Like, can this be done on the side, like putting zero effort in?
Exactly. Can this just be a quickie and we move on, please? Yeah.
Exactly. Like, yeah, that's funny. But yeah, I think it just be, being normal, being an adult. But either way, levels look good. And like you said, it may have increased because he's having more 5-alpha reductase and blockers in the system. So no, a 5-alpha reductase would take this and convert it down into DHT, and he's getting less of the conversion. So you have more testosterone. So normal. And then we look at LH-FSH. These are luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone. The signaling molecules or gonadotropins are what they're called. That would tell the testes to produce testosterone. You take HCG, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So some people are confused because they'll be like, I'm taking HCG, but these are still low. So HCG doesn't impact these. What HCG does is mimic luteinizing hormone. Yeah. So it doesn't register as luteinizing hormone. If Josh took a pregnancy test, like an HCG, he would probably come back positive because there would be HCG in his system. So yeah, when you're taking HCG, don't expect these to budge. These are never going to budge if you're on testosterone, or they shouldn't. If you are having elevated levels of these at all, when you're on testosterone, you either got fake stuff or it's been a long time since you've injected. So to those of you patients out there who think that you're tricky and come to me telling me that you've been doing the dose that we told you to do and your LH and FSH are still elevated, I know you're lying. And I always do, because there'll be guys like, oh, I'm doing everything the way you say. I just don't feel right. And my levels are only 400. How come? I'm like, your LH is 2, like what you did was you didn't inject for a few weeks before you got labs, huh? And they'll never admit to it. But I'm like,
Yep.
no, the labs aren't lying. I know what you're doing here. So just be honest, because we can kind of usually tell. Anyways, all that aside, A1C, hemoglobin A1C, that's a measurement of the amount of glucose that has basically imprinted or made an impact on his red blood cells. So red blood cells, we know they have an average lifespan, and they can do a calculation based on how much, to be simplistic, how much sugar is on the red blood cell and how much it's been exposed to over the past 90 days. So this is a good reading, like a long-term reading. How well has his blood glucose been controlled for 90 days? So we have fasting glucose, which, if it's high, we don't know if that's just an anomaly, if it's a spike, and it doesn't tell us anything about his overall health. A1C does, so it's a good thing to look at. So as you can see, they put a little reference here. 5.7 above is pre-diabetes. Anything above 6.4 is diabetes. We definitely don't even want to get close to this. We should really aim to probably keep that like 5.3 and below, as we know the higher your A1C goes, it's correlated with increased risk of disease. So Josh is killing it, and he's consistently been keeping, well, this is only a few weeks difference. So it's not, we'd expect it to pretty much be the same. You can, though, the closer to your blood draw that your glucose is elevated will have more of an impact. So, on day 90, let's see, how do I explain that? So yeah, if you had like 3 months of you were doing everything right, and then a week before getting labs, you just started eating like shit and it was higher, that will have more of an impact than the 3 months ago did. So the closer to the draw has more of an impact. But not too much. Another thing people will say is, they've got like a pre-diabetes and they're like, well, I did just come off vacation. I'm like, yeah, it really shouldn't have put, that 1 week shouldn't have pushed 3 months,
Yeah.
So this is really a good reading to see how have you been over the past 3 months. DHEA is a really important one, and you're supplemented with DHEA, right?
Correct. Just 10 milligrams a day.
Yeah. So DHEA is a neurosteroid. It's also a precursor to testosterone. We're going to have Dave Lee back on the podcast here soon, and maybe we'll do this one about neurosteroids, or maybe we'll just do it about testosterone. Maybe it'll be both included, but Dave is really intelligent when it comes to neurosteroids. But neurosteroids are cool. They're hormones. They, as the name would imply, hormones that impact our brain. And so they can help with cognitive function, executive function, verbal acuity, mental acuity, mood. These are really high when you're young and your brain is forming, and then they tend to just decline in age. And we know that giving elderly patients with low levels of these greatly improves their mental capacity. And I've seen that myself personally. I had very low levels. I don't really know what causes them to be low in younger guys. I do think that we see it a lot in anabolic users like myself. These levels will usually be tanked. Dave talks about stressful events, like going through, like having PTSD and things, we'll see lower levels. So it's interesting. I don't know exactly what causes them to lower. Certain things like that seem to. Just age in general does too. But when I started supplementing and getting my levels into a good range, I felt so much better. I'm actually 100%. Out now. I need to fill them. So yeah, those are interesting ones. The other one I like to do is pregnenolone, and maybe we can get that added to ours. I didn't realize that we don't have pregnenolone. If you're interested in pregnenolone and you're talking to your PCC, I think if you just ask for that Atlas code, I think it covers the cost of pregnenolone from what I've been told. One of my favorite PCCs, Tom, basically adds it to everybody and says that that's kind of a way to get free pregnenolone. Just add Atlas on there. So that's cool. It's a pretty cheap test, but you can do that if you just get a comprehensive, you want pregnenolone, throw code Atlas on there, and it should cover the cost of that.
Yeah. Because I think most guys, I mean, like you were saying, especially any anabolic users or exogenous hormone users, tend to see somewhat of a dip in DHEA and pregnenolone. So I supplement with pregnenolone on top of my DHEA as well, and certainly noticed a cognitive enhancement or just benefit from it.
Same. Let's see, cortisol. This one's kind of interesting because you took this one in the afternoon where we would expect it to be lower, and this one's actually lower.
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting. But cortisol, I don't get too caught up on cortisol when people see it and they're like kind of freaked out, unless it's insanely out of the range. Like I would say this is actually kind of weird and out of the range for you because it was a PM test. So I don't know if it was a stressful day for you or what. But it was just an interesting note. But unless it's like, if the morning cortisol is like 30 or something, which is way outside the range of 40, then I'm a little concerned. But if you had a morning cortisol of like 17, I wouldn't get too freaked out about it. It's just, like I said, this could have been impacted by his stress level that day. It's going to fluctuate so much that we can't get a lot of inference off of that one reading. It's like blood pressure where, it's going to fluctuate. We need to see more than one. So there are more in-depth tests, like a Dutch test, a dried urine test, where you're urinating in this cup throughout the entire day, and they can kind of map out your cortisol production throughout the whole day. That's going to be more accurate. So don't get too hung up on it, though it can be a good indicator. Probably the best is if you're taking it first thing in the morning and your levels are actually really low, then that's concerning because you should have elevated cortisol in the morning. And maybe there's some dysregulation there. And those people usually were the ones that talk about insomnia and stuff like that, because maybe their cortisol is not regulated properly and they're waking up in the middle of the night because they're getting a spike in cortisol and they're going and eating carbs or something like that. So that's when it can be useful. But other than that, it doesn't tell us a lot just because it's one reading.
Yeah. Well, and that last reading was actually from January, first thing in the morning. So some of these are from,
You're right.
PC. Yep. So that was a morning cortisol test as well.
You're right. Yeah, it says that. Okay. Yeah. So all totally normal. Prolactin, this is one that I've talked a lot about, but his levels are fine. Prolactin, you want to look at that because sometimes we see guys feel like they have low testosterone, but they just have high prolactin, because high prolactin can cause low libido, poor erection quality, inability to achieve orgasm, things like that. So his is good. Don't need to do anything with that. PSA is kind of important to look at when you're on testosterone. I mean, it's good to see where he was before and then where he goes. This is all still, totally normal. And he's been running, he ran high dose steroids for a long time, switched over to TRT for a long time, and his PSA has stayed very normal. So it's not negatively impacting your prostate. It's just good to measure though, because DHT can or does have a high affinity for prostate tissue and can exacerbate issues for sure. IGF-1, this one's fun to look at, especially in a highly muscular, well-performing dude like yourself. Like a lot of people would say both these levels are low and you need to add in growth hormone peptides and growth hormone, et cetera. You're obviously performing exceptionally well with a body that everybody would love to have, and your growth hormone and IGF are not, stellar. Mine are similar and I don't do a thing about it. I don't think that there's a lot of utility to do so. The one time that I would try to bring it up for people is if, say Josh was training for a marathon and he's like, my recovery is just tanked. I'm taking days to recover from my runs. Maybe then it would have a little bit of utility. The thing that I hate is that there's so many clinics that advertise growth hormone and IGF-1 as a longevity tool, like to improve longevity. And I feel like that's so like just disingenuous. I try to explain to people in a way that I think that they can understand, which is like visual. And I tell people, when was the time in life that you had the most growth hormone and IGF-1, like a teenager? And it's like, think about a teenager and how rapidly they age. So the same thing happens to us when we're ramping up our growth hormone, and later in life. If we have this extremely high growth hormone IGF-1, we're increasing cell turnover and we're increasing aging. So that's the opposite of longevity. Why would we sell it and advertise it as such? It can have utility to help in certain conditions, like, if you're getting poor sleep quality and poor recovery and everything, but just running it year round, I think is crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I think the anti-aging or marketing behind it is super, just almost a flat out lie for a lot of people. I mean, I get what they're trying to say in the sense that, like, if you're older, it may help with your recovery and make you feel a little bit better. So you can classify that as an anti-aging, but on face value, it's not really that.
Right. Yeah. You may feel a little bit of improvement in hair, skin, nail quality at first. But again, that's just telling us that, if your skin and stuff is improving, you're getting faster cell turnover. Again, you're speeding up things. It's never a good sign. Never a good thing to do. Vitamin D, great. I like levels to be above 50, and his has continue to be above 50, so that's great. Do you supplement with vitamin D? Well, I know you do because I never see any levels this high. So how much do you take?
I think at the moment it is between my lock and load that has it from Derek, and then my vitamin K2 and D, or as combined. I think it's right at 6,000 IUs a day.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, we usually recommend around 5,000, but everybody's different. Base that off what your provider says. LP little a, this is an important one to measure. Just like we talked about with the lipids previously, we had apolipoprotein B. We have lipoprotein little a. So this is different, not to be mistaken with capital A one, which is like the HDL one. And the naming on this is just horrible because it confuses people. But LP little a, or lowercase a in parentheses, this is very atherogenic, meaning that it, as you can see even here, they throw in independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease, because this one is very, very atherogenic. So you want levels to be ideally probably below 50, which Josh does. So you kind of either have the genes for this or you don't. I don't know how you feel, but I'm kind of in the same boat as you, where I have this small amount and I'm like, damn, I would really rather that just be zero.
Yes, no, and I was curious that it would be, because back in January when I first had it tested, I was not supplementing with any cholesterol altering medications, and I was hoping that, I know really only the PCSK9 inhibitors are the only one that show like any lowering of it, but
yeah. I mean, this isn't going to, like, as they say, greater than 75 is, what the independent risk factor is. So I'm okay with mine that I'm like in the 20s, but I do wish it was zero, because there's some people that it's just undetectable. And I wish I was those individuals. Those individuals are at much less risk of having cardiovascular disease. We see a lot of people with extremely high ones. And like Josh said, you really can't do anything about it. There's no drugs on the market that lower it. There are the PCSK9 inhibitors, but we don't know if that lowering that they cause is clinically significant. So what I tell people is, if you have elevated LP little a and you were thinking about picking up smoking and eating McDonald's and everything, just don't. It's not a good idea. Do keep your controllable factors low. So keep like Josh is doing, keep LDL-C, ApoB, keep all that intact, stay metabolically healthy, stay inflammatorily suppressed, keep your inflammation low, and you should be good. But yeah, that's an interesting one, a good one to read. Really, you only have to get it one time in your life, because you've either got it or you don't. This probably won't change. As you can see, very little variation. He's not suddenly one day going to have 5,000, it's just not going to occur.
Yeah.
CRP, C-reactive protein, is a marker of inflammation. This is a high sensitivity one. High sensitivity and cardiac are synonymous. You'll either see it as HS, high sensitivity, or cardiac, but it's just a very sensitive CRP, and CRP is a marker of inflammation. Josh is great. He's stayed below 1, which means his risk of cardiovascular disease is very, very low. The thing with CRP is it is highly sensitive, not very specific. So if Josh were to have, cut his toe, this could be elevated, and it wouldn't mean that it is coming from, arteries and things. It's any inflammation in the body. So he could be fighting off a sickness, and he could get inflammation. So when I see somebody come in with a really high one, a lot of times they're scared, because like, oh my God, it's above 3 and I'm at a high risk for cardiovascular event. No, that's not the case, because anything could be causing it. Unless we're seeing this constantly high time after time or increasing, I don't worry about it. To keep inflammation low, though, just keep your antioxidants high. So eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, supplement with antioxidants, NAC, glutathione, things like that. Estradiol, so that is the estrogen that we are concerned with men. That's what testosterone's converted into. His testosterone went up a bit, so does estrogen. We can expect that to occur. Also, he has more of, like he said, that he's not doing the 5-alpha reductase. It's not being 5-alpha reduced, so probably more of it's being aromatized. And aromatization is the conversion of testosterone into estradiol. So it's a little bit higher. Do you feel anything from this? Because this is something guys are super concerned with all the time too.
Not really. And, I kind of like the estrogen and free testosterone ratio is kind of more of what I pay attention to. And, my free T was based, I forget what it was, like 20 or
29, I think.
Yeah, 29. So I kind of like a 2-to-1 ratio there, and like that kind of almost falls right within that range. And I feel like anytime that estrogen is too low and like that free testosterone is that range is almost like a 1-to-1. I don't like the way I feel there. So I actually feel honestly better, like libido wise, cognitive function wise, when my estradiol is a little on the higher end and it's more of like a 2-to-1 ratio.
I agree. I prefer my estrogen to be higher. I never really blocked it. So we don't treat estrogen unless there's side effects being caused by it. Usually that revolves around like gyno, breast sensitivity, nipple tenderness. We don't usually jump straight to an AI. There's ways to mitigate estrogen without an AI, like increasing dose frequency, lowering dose, things like that. But I wouldn't be concerned with this. I think that's totally reasonable and he's feeling fine. So I wouldn't change it.
And a good point. Sorry. And one last good point where it was 32.5 back in January. I actually felt worse back then with it being lower, like libido wise, and actually felt a little more emotional, like almost low estrogenic symptoms. So just more noting, like, don't be afraid of it if it's a little higher, especially being on exogenous testosterone. I feel like having a constant bleed of a high hormone like that, it's almost better to have a little higher estrogen to kind of blunt that. Whereas a natural guy's having those peaks and valleys, so it almost makes sense that his would be a little bit lower.
Agreed. GGT, that's also a liver marker that we can look at. This would have to, so yeah, we talked about with your bilirubin, potentially there's a biliary block or something. We would expect this to be higher if it was like, say your bile duct was blocked or there was something going on with the gallbladder. So I don't think there is. Your GGT is very, very normal and very low. So this is another great marker, and it can kind of separate out where the injury to the liver is coming. So liver looks great. I'm not concerned at all with the liver. Progesterone, we already touched on that. It is important for guys to have good amounts of progesterone for mood, libido, etc. Yours is totally normal. This one's really cool. Insulin we like to measure because A1C, as I talked about before, that hemoglobin A1C, that can be affected by red blood cells. So if you have a variation in your red blood cell, say shape like sickle cell, or if you have red blood cells that live longer on average and others are shorter, all that will impact it. Glucose, we know so many things can impact that. Insulin is cool though. He has had low insulin, and we look at insulin as a marker of metabolic health. So if he's fasted, he should have no insulin in the system, and he has very low. So as you can see, normal medical guidelines would say anything below 25 is normal, and we think that's kind of absurd. I say anything below 5 is really where you should be. And so Josh has been killing it, very metabolically healthy, staying below 5. Ferritin, that's that protein that carries iron that we talked about. Again, in isolation, it can be a good marker of inflammation. His is fine, though. I don't think he's overly inflamed. There's no iron overload, anything like that. Thyroid, we already covered. SHBG is an important one to look at. So that's sex hormone binding globulin that binds to it binds to androgens and estrogens. So it has an affinity. Like the higher the androgen, the more it will bind to it. So DHT has the most affinity, and then testosterone, and then downstream from there, the estrogens. So yeah, we look at this because if you had really high SHBG, we'd expect a low free testosterone, low free testosterone, and vice versa. Some guys will have perfect total testosterone and really low SHBG, and that's perfect and really low free testosterone because they have high SHBG rather. And so sometimes you don't need testosterone to get up your free testosterone. You may just need to take some supplements to lower SHBG. So there's things like boron and magnesium, Tongkat Ali, increasing carbohydrates. There's so many different things that can lower SHBG. So that's usually where we'll start if it's just a free testosterone issue. You can try to exhaust that before having to go on a lifetime of TRT just because you have a one-time reading of a low free testosterone. So that's just an interesting thing. I mean, this is totally normal. You don't want it too low. Too low would be not good because then you'd have crazy amounts of free androgens or hormones just floating around. That's not good. This is kind of a governor where, the SHBG regulates how much hormone is out and can be used. And it also brings it to specific tissues. So I don't like that there's a lot of clinics and a lot of people in the hormone space that focus so much on this. And and they act like free testosterone is all that matters, I think that's way too simplistic. I mean, it would just, like, if going back up, say, I mean, these are normal levels. I know these are TRT induced, but this would be considered normal physiologic level. So it wouldn't make sense to me ever that our body produces 886 nanograms per deciliter, but only uses 29 of it. How highly inefficient that would be, And so I think people think that once it binds to SHBG, then it just like gets shit out or something and never used again, which is not the case. It's literally
That's a good point.
carrying it to the tissue that needs it and letting it go. And so it's like, I don't get too hung up on it. There's so many clinics that will sell you just based on this. Like, all that matters is free testosterone. That's not the case. Yes, it's important to look at for sure, but it's not all that matters. It goes back to that dogmatic crap of, there's no blood donations, no AIs, and all that matters is free testosterone. All of that is way too simplistic. And if you're going to a clinic that says that stuff, I think that you should go elsewhere. Go to Marek, use code Atlas.
Yes.
Go somewhere, anywhere that, will take a more holistic approach and look at the entire picture. But anyways, that is something that will impact. SHBG will directly impact this. I think that was it. ApoB. Oh yeah. ApoB, big one. So yeah, previously, and this is why Josh is taking the statin right now, is because he wanted to lower this. So ApoB, as we said, that's going to wrap around all those not so great cholesterols, as we can say, but really it's this thing that's not so great. So we want this to be lower. And the reason why LDL, VLDL, et cetera, is considered bad is because it contains this thing. So really all we need to look at when we're looking at lipids is this, because this encapsulates, we get to view all those other ones, and we want this lower. And so we know that levels below around 60 are like, that's what we're talking about. We're just completely eradicating the risk of cardiovascular disease. So Josh has brought his from a 95 down to a 44 with this very, very light treatment that he's doing, which is awesome. So his risk is, low moving forward, which is great.
Yeah.
Cool. And we made it through the whole thing, and I got like 2 minutes to spare. Any additional add-ons?
No, man, I'll let you get to it. But yeah, we just kind of wanted to do this just to show what, obviously you guys can get, using code Atlas and getting your labs done. As you can see, it's very in depth, and I mean, really doesn't leave anything to spare for any guessing games for you. So, pretty cool. And what Adam just did with me is what you would receive at Marek from myself as one of the PCCs or many of the other PCCs on staff to kind of walk you through that, break down what they see. And then as well as when you go into your provider visit, they get even more in depth as the medical professional to really dive into these labs and, discuss any concerns you may have with any high markers that just like, you see this on paper, oh, it's high, it's, scary, and they can kind of put your mind at ease or let you know if it's something you should worry about or not.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully we see you over at Marek soon for the 90th time. Use code Atlas because we really want to use whatever code you want. Honestly, we don't get any money for this. It was just a way that we could help to save you. I mean, it would be literally illegal for us to receive money for that. So we don't just use whatever code you can, save money. We just want to be able to give this kind of stuff to you guys. So we talk about all this stuff. So we wanted to show you what you get, that you can get even more in-depth labs than this. I have patients take these to their providers a lot when they just get like this one. And they usually come back saying, my provider didn't know what half of these were, or they were confused. Why would you order so much stuff? I mean, we went line by line and talked about the importance of every single marker. So it's not like we're just throwing on willy-nilly shit to ramp up, cost. Yep. Each one of these definitely plays a huge role, as you can see, in overall health and longevity. And so that's why they're on there. These are the labs that I like to get every 3 months, honestly. And I know most people can't afford that. If you can do it once a year, at least, great. I'd say ideally maybe twice a year, but quarterly is probably the best because you can see how different practices are impacting you. Like Josh's ApoB, for example, or, if I were to suddenly take up running for 3 months, I'd certainly want to know what kind of an impact that's having on certain things, and so many people do diets or try new things, and then they just guess, you're just guessing, how is this affecting me? So yeah, that's the importance of lab work and what you can get through coming. So hopefully that was helpful. Definitely subscribe, share with your buddies, like all our shit and all that, and make us famous, please. Anything else you want to add?
Nothing other than are we cool to say you're coming to Dallas now, and Adam will be here in Texas soon? Yeah, Adam is coming to Texas, and we're going to be working on getting an in-person studio built out. So this will not be you guys won't have my shitty background for forever, and we'll be in person and doing our thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go take a poop before I see patients. So we'll see you guys next time.
See you soon.